Hi, I'm Matt Culkin, co-chair of Steptoe's Financial Services Group, and welcome to the Steptoe Financial Services University. We're pleased to welcome you to participate in a series of short, focused conversations with my colleagues from across our firm's practice groups from all over the world. Through Steptoe University, we're going to explore key issues and topics that impact businesses in the financial services arena. Please visit our course offerings to learn more and check back regularly to see what we've added. Today we're going to talk about Puerto Rico, the bankruptcy, the restructuring, and what it might mean for other state and local governments. I'm joined by my colleague Luis Fortuño from our Washington office. Luis is a skilled corporate lawyer, but brings a unique perspective having served in the United States Congress and as the governor of Puerto Rico. Luis, thank you for joining me.
Matt, thank you for the invitation. Pleasure.
So let's start at the beginning. It's a very good place to start. You know, what happened if we go back to 2014? What are sort of the first steps that lead us back to today?
Sure. In the case of Puerto Rico, which is not unique in that sense, the three major rating agencies downgraded Puerto Rico bonds to junk status. And actually, Puerto Rico has 18 different types of bonds, and most of them were downgraded at that moment, and then many of them immediately thereafter. As a result of that, Puerto Rico's liquidity was severely affected, as was the economy, and that evolved into a situation that by 2015, the Puerto Rico government was already stating that it was going to default on its obligations. And that prompted Congress, since states and territories could not file for bankruptcy contrary to cities and counties, that prompted Congress by the summer of 2016 to approve PROMESA, which is a legislation that it's similar to a Chapter 9 bankruptcy proceeding for territories, not for states, for territories. So we had already counties and cities that were covered by existing legislation, and PROMESA now permits the 5 U.S. territories to file for bankruptcy under certain circumstances. And Puerto Rico has been the first and only territory so far to file under PROMESA. As a result of that, negotiations started between creditors and the government of Puerto Rico. But by 2017, Puerto Rico actually used the Title III provisions under the PROMESA legislation to actually file and file for bankruptcy, bring about a stay, and protect itself from creditors.
And I understand from the legislation that it also brings in a new function, a sort of an oversight board. How has that worked?
Sure, and that's a very important point. Somewhat similar to what Congress did in the 90s with the District of Columbia. The U.S. Congress decided that Puerto Rico required some sort of supervision, and it created a supervisory body. It's the Oversight Board of 7 individuals that are appointed by the president, 6 of which must come from lists provided by the congressional leaders, the Senate majority and minority leader, the Speaker of the House, and the minority leader in the House. And at that time, President Obama appointed the first 7 members. They served for a period of 3 years. It's been 4 years now, and President Trump is supposed to be appointing new members at the time that we're taping this. 2 of them have already resigned and they're off the board. A third one actually submitted his resignation effective in a few weeks. And so that means that the Oversight Board will require new appointments in order to be a functioning body again.
And if they can't fill a quorum, what happens to the Oversight Board?
Well, that's an interesting point. At this moment, according to the regulations, they need 5 of the 7 members to operate, which they still have at this moment. If it drops down to 4, according to their internal regulations, they will need to wait to take some decisions. Of course, there is a U.S. District Court judge that is overseeing this process, and that judge, Judge Swain, was appointed by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. According to PROMESA, that was the process. I would presume that the judge would have to intervene and actually take over the process for the time being. There is a fiscal plan that has been certified and approved by the existing board. I presume that fiscal plan will stay in place until there is a new Oversight Board appointed, and presumably they may decide to amend that fiscal plan or not. And actually, the plan of adjustment for the different types of bonds depends on what's on the fiscal plan. So that is a very important document that has been certified by the Oversight Board. COVID and the lockdowns have affected the assumptions under which the current fiscal plan was approved and certified. So at this moment, actually, as we speak, everyone is expecting a new fiscal plan to be presented to the court by the Oversight Board, and that will be a subject, I'm sure, of perhaps further litigation.
So, Governor, you talked a little bit about PROMESA coming out during the Obama administration. We're now in a period of economic uncertainty due to COVID. Can you talk a little bit about the politics surrounding Puerto Rico, the bankruptcy, restructuring, the path forward? I'm curious your take both in terms of the temperature on Capitol Hill, but also in Puerto Rico.
Sure, and it's important to understand the what was happening and had happened in the municipal market in years right before this occurred in Puerto Rico. In 2013, Detroit went bankrupt, and that was at that time the largest public bankruptcy in the country. Now Puerto Rico is actually larger, almost 5 times larger than Detroit's. However, we see similarities in what affected Detroit and what affected Puerto Rico and prompted both jurisdictions to end up in a bankruptcy proceeding. Declining population, high unemployment, high poverty levels, irregular financial audits, budget deficits, severe budget deficits, and high levels of debt. Detroit's debt was about 20 billion. In the case of Puerto Rico, it's about 70 billion. So much larger. But we see the same issues coming about, and of course that brings about also additional issues, and how are other jurisdictions that may be facing severe deficits as a result of different policies, but certainly COVID-19, how they're going to be facing their situation, and how are they going to actually make it up. Cities like the city of Chicago, for example. It's interesting that the city of Chicago went out a couple of years ago, went out on the market to try to raise some monies for its education system, and the cost, the pricing was higher than expected. And a lot of people feel that it had to do with Puerto Rico and what was happening in the case of Puerto Rico. Another interesting aspect is that you have general obligation bonds, the taxes you raise and what have you, but you also have special revenue bonds. For example, in the case of Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rico Highway and Transportation Authority is depends on funding that it collects in the toll roads, and so on and so forth. So there is a steady flow of funds and revenue that it's generated, and the Puerto Rico Highway and Transportation Authority went to Judge Swain, and in 2018, Judge Swain ruled that even though the Highway Authority was still receiving this flow of funds, and it's and the position taken by all courts under Chapter 9, regular Chapter 9 bankruptcy had been that if you are a special revenue bond, even though if there's a stay, you continue to pay if you have revenue. In this case, the court decided that the Highway Authority did not have to pay. That created havoc, certainly, and a lot of questions in the marketplace as to, is this applicable only to Puerto Rico under PROMESA, or could this be extrapolated to other jurisdictions that have issued special revenue bonds are facing severe budgetary issues. So there are certain concerns that stem out of some of the decisions that are being made by the court.
And I think that's interesting, and I'm curious your thoughts about what that means going forward. You've touched on a few particular areas where the Puerto Rico credit risk might have impacted pricing in other places. I mean, when you look forward, there's clearly a different path for a territory versus a state versus a city or a county. So when you look at the last 6+ years, what does all of this mean as we head into 2021?
Well, certainly states cannot file for bankruptcy. At least the state of affairs today is that they cannot. Now territories can, and counties and municipalities can. However, there are cities that are facing severe budgetary issues like Chicago, but there are states as well. And the biggest concern is not just the debt. For example, Connecticut has a debt north of $21 billion, but it has unfunded pension liabilities surpassing $103 billion. What's going to happen with those unfunded pension liabilities? Same thing with New Jersey. The unfunded pension liabilities for New Jersey is $255 billion. And for Massachusetts, it's $191 billion. So I'm just giving you a taste of what's out there. Is it higher taxes? Is it slashing expenses? Is it both? Are they going to be able, now that interest rates are so low, are they going to be able to renegotiate their debt at better terms, long term? Well, if they are, if they have this Damocles, sword on top of their head, and especially on funded pension liabilities, how will the market react to that? And as opposed to better run states. So I think it's fascinating, and I believe we're going to see a lot going on, and perhaps some litigation in the future along these lines.
And what about the role of the credit rating agencies? They played a vital part of the trajectory of Puerto Rico and its credit. Do we see that same factor playing in here with other states?
Yes. And as you know, the credit rating agencies, after the 2008-09 global financial crisis, they strengthened their, shall we say, requirements to upgrade or grade your, cities and municipalities and states' debt. So I'm sure they're breathing down the neck of a number of cities and states, and otherwise, if they don't do what they ought to be doing, they will face a downgrade with the actually effects that will have in not just the pricing, the cost of money for the state or city, but certainly capabilities of building new roads and schools and doing whatever they may want to do.
And so, before I let you go, you've touched on a number of issues that impact issuers, underwriters, investors, citizens. Before we call it a day, I'm curious if you have any closing thoughts that you want to make sure our audience gets before the end.
Sure, Matt. And actually, I'm glad that you asked me. Some people that may be watching us may say, "What do I care? I mean, those are wealthy investors, and I have nothing to do with this." Well, check your 401k or your retirement fund. Because normally those funds are going to be investing, and it makes sense that they invest in the municipal market. And this is important to everyone that's watching this because it may affect their retirement or their savings plans for the future.
That's a really good point. Well, thank you, Governor, for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure again. Thank you.
And so that does it for another episode of Steptoe University, where we explored Puerto Rico, bankruptcy, and restructuring. You can watch more Steptoe Financial Services University videos and get more information about our financial services practice group at steptoe.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.